So I'm excited to be here. First of all, I have worked in Monmouth and Ocean counties for the bulk of my career, serving children and families, both in home health care, school-based practice, and private practice. But more recently, with the changes in the Medicaid funding, DIR Floortime, or the developmental model, is now covered, which really allows much more opportunities for the model to become more familiar with people and for families to access, different types of approach, because, most commonly people are familiar with applied behavioral analysis, or ABA, and not so much with DIR Floortime or the developmental model. So anyway, with the changes in funding, it has really allowed, much more families to and their children to access care. So please feel free to call me Sue. I welcome questions as we go along. So Wendy already told you about me, but I just want to share that was my original badge when I graduated from Kean University as an occupational therapist. At that point, OTs wore white lab coats, and they had their, wherever they went to school, sewn on their sleeve. And somehow I managed to save that, and it serves as a reminder of my roots. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the what, where, how, when, and why of the developmental model of autism care. So first of all, let's learn together and think about the developmental model of care and what this is. So it's part of a category of approaches known as developmental relationship-based interventions, or DRBI, which includes the DIR model. It's a parent-mediated approach in that parents are the experts in their child's care, and the model can be done by parents. So it's not grandparents, teachers, and many people in the community as well. So it's not a therapist or teacher doing to the child. It's caregivers joining with the child or youth. They're evidence-based. This is an evidence-based approach. It's a bottom-up approach, but by that we mean that it's a developmental model. We use typical development as our guidelines, because if you think of what does a baby have to do as soon as they're born, they have to regulate, they have to start engaging with their primary caregivers, and we look at all those natural stages, and that really is how we proceed with care of our clients. We know that the developmental model addresses all aspects of development because we are using a developmental approach, and it addresses including social emotional development. And DRBI uses natural play interests of the client and then expands. So some of the children, youth, and teens may have very specialized interests, so that's where we would start. So the developmental model is a new choice, but not a new approach. It's based on, most commonly, the work of Dr. Stanley Greenspan and Dr. Serena Wieder. Dr. Greenspan was a child psychiatrist who's no longer living. Dr. Serena Wieder is a child psychologist and is still much alive and practicing. The DIR model was established in the 70s based on their research, and the research has expanded with 50 plus years of research and going strong. I mentioned the developmental model relies on everyday activities like play. So let's think about what the D in the developmental model stands for. The D is for functional emotional development. So when we think of emotional development, we think of a continuum. So babies are born, and the focus is regulation and shared attention. Next in the developmental model would come social engagement, being able to engage with primary caregivers and then expand to other caregivers and adults, and then moving on to peers. Many of peer social emotional development and peer interactions sometimes can be challenging for children and youth with autism. The next capacity or level is back and forth circles of communication, and that could be nonverbal or verbal. And we'll talk about what that can look like depending on the age and stage of the client. The next level 4, shared social problem solving, which we consider as the ability to expand, really is about the child being able to solve problems, but not solve problems alone, but to solve problems with another person. For example, like many of the children I've worked with over the years are very good at climbing and reaching things that are really interesting to them, whether it be accessing an iPad, accessing a preferred food and on a kitchen cabinet. But this is the ability to solve problems in the moment with the person. There's a difference. The next level, level 5, is the ability to create symbols, also known as pretend play, and this is really important. Symbolic thinking really sets the stage for higher level learning. It's really hard to learn once you get past kindergarten because the information becomes more abstract. And that's why some children do, very well in general ed preschool programs, and then even into kindergarten. But if they haven't reached the symbolic level, it's very hard because, the learning starts to be done more in the mind and not with manipulatives. We look about for younger children. We look at how the child plays, and if they're able to play symbolically. There's stepping stones to that. So, for example, many children have kitchen sets, at home, or they might have car garages, to play with, or fire stations or barns. So if a child is playing with those, structures as intended, so if they're playing with a farm set and they're moving the different farm animals around, that is a precursor to symbolic play, but it's not symbolic play because they're using the objects as intended. Same as like a kitchen set. If a child is using, like a Melissa and Doug kitchen set at home with, the spatula, the pots and pans, that's more functional play. But if the child takes on the role of being the mother, the grandmother, then that's symbolic play because that's an original idea. So, it's tricky. It can look symbolic, but it may not be. The next, level 6, is the ability to bridge ideas together and make meaningful connections. So if we're thinking about the example of, say, for example, reenacting school or the bus driver, the play would have a beginning, middle, and end. So sometimes the children or youth may be able to connect like one symbolic idea, but doesn't necessarily tell a story. But say, if we use the example of, say, I'm Miss Linda, the school bus driver, and my client is pretending to get on the school bus, just a little toy school bus, and he's using a figure to do that. Then Miss Linda is driving him to school, and then he's coming up with the next idea. Oh no, I forgot my backpack. Oh, we got to go back home, Miss Linda. So I'm driving the toy school bus. Okay, then we go, to his school, and then the day unfolds. And that's bridging. That's connecting multiple symbolic ideas. So when a child or youth or teen is able to do that, well, that's great. We're always super excited when we see that because it just allows so much more capacities and application to adult life. The next, level 7, is multi-causal thinking. And these levels 7, 8, and 9 we see develop typically, in later, close to preteen, and teenage years. So again, many of the younger children, we wouldn't even look at these levels, but let's just discuss it because we have older children that we, work with or know, or you might have in your family. So multi-causal thinking is the ability to think of more than one reason for something. So for example, say you get to the grocery store and you forgot your bags, and then you go back to your car and you realize, oh no, someone took the bags. So, it's to be able to think about, why that happened. Did Was it just that I forgot to put them back in the car? Did I switch cars? And to think of more than one reason why this situation happened. So again, just thinking about these everyday examples. The next level 8, gray area thinking, is the ability to compare. And oftentimes we could think of many adults who really struggle with gray area thinking. So these may be adults that we know who are more concrete, more black and white thinkers, really can't see any nuances to a situation. So it's either all or none. And level 9 is the ability to reflect on your own internal standard. So it doesn't matter if everyone in this room thinks one way. It's okay if I have my own idea because it's based on my own internal standard. So again, these last 3 levels are begin in pre-adolescence but continue through the adult span. Now, I just want to point out, we all move through these levels or capacities every single day, even though we're adults. It could be that we're having just a harder day. Our ability to regulate, has dropped down. But usually as adults, we've had so much practice over the years, we can self-regulate and move ourselves back up. We know when we've had a bad day, it's hard to think of, it's hard to be multi-causal. Sometimes, we do get more concrete when we're upset. So again, we use this because this is based on typical development. And these are, typical social emotional levels. Okay, so the I in stands for individual differences, but the I in the DRBI or DIR model, that's what it is, individual differences. Now, we're not going to do this, but if we went around the room, we would all have our own individual differences. And that's perfectly fine. Listen, we got here, we're dressed, we're, ready to go today. We're being our best selves. And that's great. But some of the children and youth, their individual differences may be more impactful. And that's what we would consider in the DIR model or developmental model. So for example, I might be sensitive to busy environments. So busy environments might be like going to a very busy mall at Christmas time or, a holiday time. And that might be a little overstimulating for me. But, I get through it, I manage. But for another, a child or youth or teen who's more sensitive, it could be that it might lead to a dysregulation or a meltdown.
Could be what?
Dysregulation, that means the opposite of regulation. It means, another like layman's term or is like having a meltdown. So that would be an example of a sensory processing difference. Differences can also be in motor and motor planning. Again, some people just have a little bit better motor planning than others. And listen, we're all here, and we're fine. Regulation, there might be differences in a client's ability to self-regulate, and the adult might have to do more co-regulation, and that's okay. But these are helpful things to identify and to know. There might be individual differences in learning styles. Like, for example, some people have a great visual memory, but their auditory memory might be weaker. That would be me. And then some people are really great hands-on learners. Like if they're doing something, they learn it once and they could do it the rest of their lives. Some other individual differences that we think about in the developmental model is a history of trauma. And trauma could be emotional trauma. It could be medical trauma. It could be, being born prematurely. It could be just about anything. The client or youth might have differences in visual spatial processing, and that's the intersection of motor and vision. That's the ability to navigate space and manipulate objects in 3D space with the body. So it's not 2D space like on a computer screen. It's that 3D learning. We already spoke a little bit about differences in auditory processing. Another individual differences is differences in language and communication. Some Children and youth may be at the pre-verbal communication level and may use an AAC, an augmentative communication device. Some children may use sign language. Again, just important information for us to know about. There may be cultural differences, and we all have different cultures and religions. Another individual difference is in attachment. And just because, like we think about, babies forming strong attachments, but that doesn't always happen for whatever reason. And it could be a teen who's still struggling with forming a secure attachment with a caregiver. And each family can have their own individual differences, and that's okay. It's really when these differences are impactful that it can be, problematic. And then there may be biomedical individual differences. And we know for children or youth who have autism, there's a high comorbidity for anxiety and seizure disorders. Those are two very common co-occurrent diagnoses. I know that was a lot in a very short time, but again, we're just getting a beginning understanding, and we really want to think about more the hands-on. So if it's okay with everyone, we'll continue. Yeah, okay, perfect. And as I mentioned, just like we all have our own individual differences, families are different too and have unique needs. So the R in the DRBI or DIR model stands for relationships. And the strength of primary caregiver relationships foster development and healthy emotional connections. And that quote is from Dr. Stanley Greenspan and Dr. Serena Weider. And that's based on their research, which continues to date that relationships really do matter. And they serve as drivers. They're in the driver's seat of development. And through relationships, caregivers and youth grow together through the therapeutic process. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the D, which is the functional, emotional, developmental levels. We talked about the I, which is individual differences. We just touched upon the R for relationships. So that is just our foundation. And now let's talk about where can the developmental model of care be used. It can be used anywhere. It can be used at home, school, and community settings. And it could be used in other settings too. And family and school caregivers are integral components of the client's care. Now, some schools, just like they have ABA programs, they may have DIR Floortime classrooms. It really all depends on each public school district. Some special education schools have set up their own DIR programs. So again, public schools are also doing a lot more and offering different classrooms that address needs. The most important thing is that we want to have the principles of the DIR model used across settings. Okay, so let's move on to section 3, how the developmental model of care can be used, and just some key components. So many people have heard the term floor time and wonder, well, what exactly does that mean? So floor time is a copyrighted and trademark term. So another way to describe floor time is play with a purpose. So yes, in floor time you may sit on the floor because that may match where the child or youth's developmental level is to be on the floor. But for teens, or young adults, they may actually feel more comfortable sitting at a table and engaging in play with a purpose. So again, it's really suited to the unique needs of the person. So the developmental model uses floor time, but it also addresses parent education, which it can include learning about the model, and parent coaching with the parent present, with the child present, and of course the parent present as well. And the goal is for parents to be the experts. So it's all great for teachers and therapists to be, quote, the experts, but we're really not the experts because we don't know your child nearly as well as you do. So it would be really a false assumption to think that we are experts. So some principles of play with a purpose or floor time are to focus on the relationship. So it's less about what you're doing, but it's more about connecting while you're doing it. We want to join the child's world to capture their natural interests. And we're going to talk more about this. And we want to know about the child's individual differences, because the individual differences may be a barrier about why the child is not connecting or playing with another person. We want to go for the gleam in the eye. That means having fun together, though. We want to support co-regulation because we want the play to continue. Like, we don't want to just have 2 minutes of successful play. We want to have, we want to start maybe if 1 or 2 is our starting point, then we want to build to 3 or 4 minutes. Then we want to build to 5 or 10 minutes. But we might have to do it with co-regulation. And that's using ourselves as a therapeutic tool. So say if Lisa needed to jump on her trampoline in the next room, maybe we would take a trampoline break. So it's just using what I know about whoever, but recognizing that if a person needs to take a break to sustain the interaction, that's okay. And we want to strive for a continuous flow. So when we think of continuous flow, that means those back and forth circles of interaction. Okay, and we want to open the door to symbolic thinking, and are people parents in the room, grandparents or aunts and uncles? Yeah. So if you've played with younger children, you know that you do this kind of spontaneously, where say that the child you're playing with is interested in cell phones. So I might pretend to call. I might pick up whatever's handy, like I might pick up this paper towel roll, and I might pretend to make a phone call. And I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Jennifer. So I might say, "Hey Jennifer, it's Miss Sue. You want to come play with me?" And they're thinking, "Oh my gosh, why is she talking into a paper towel roll?" But I've captured her interest. And then if she picks up something like, Jennifer, if you pick up your pen or whatever you have and you speak back, well, hey, we have entered a symbolic world. And children do this. It usually happens natural, but many children who may have more individual differences, it doesn't happen so natural. So again, it's playful, it's fun. And then so I was the initiator in that point. But if Jennifer, if I was, doing dishes in the background and Jennifer's trying to get my attention and initiates it, that's even better. So yeah, exactly. And I might say, 2 more minutes. I'm trying to finish the dishes, and then you still stayed with me. That's even greater. That you stood with, like waited. Now many of the children can't wait. So like if I knew you couldn't wait, I would say, okay. I would pick up the spoon whenever I was washing and say, "Oh, thank you. I'm so happy you called me." Again, trying to stay in that symbolic world. And I know, like, until you've worked with a person who's less symbolic, it may not seem as important, but it really is so important. So just a few strategies to think about. We're going to start with regulation. If someone's upset, you really can't do anything. Like if so you have to make sure that the child or youth is calm and regulated, and then they'll be able to share attention with you. We want to reduce distractions and think about the play space, not only distractions for the child or youth, but distractions for ourselves. So that would mean like I should not, as the player, should not have my cell phone out. And it wouldn't be the time to try and like cook dinner, mop the floor, and try and play all at the same time, unless we were doing it together. The next strategy would to position yourself at or below the child's eye level. I want to share facial expressions. Like I don't want to keep myself just one affect or one facial expression. I want to use a range of facial expressions. So if I'm mad, I want to use like a mad face. Like, and if the child looks mad and I'm being that child's voice, I would say for the child, "I'm mad," and I would I would put some oomph into it. because many of the children and youth aren't able to express themselves, so sometimes we model and validate what we see them experiencing. We read the child's cues and adapt to current needs. So say if, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Catherine. So say, Catherine, you were starting to get really antsy, you know, like your body was starting to move around. I would say, you know what, maybe we should let's go, you know, in the backyard for a couple minutes and we'll continue playing. You know, like maybe maybe you need to move around. You know, again, whatever I thought that the person needed. We want to make everything intentional. So say, for example, child's just kind of throwing things on the floor. Now, again, this would be a rare incident, but we know that young children, like babies, throw things off their high chair all the time. So there is a developmental. It is for younger children. It is developmentally appropriate. Like we look for these markers, and older children not so much. But if the child never threw things off their high chair and they're doing it now, well, that's a step up in their development. Like say if they were passive and just never really explored what was the objects in front of their space, but I might make it more purposeful. So I might, you know, we would call it a game, and I might just take like a laundry basket and I might call it, the throwing in game. Again, we're just using what we see the child doing that they never did before. And you might think about like when your children or children that you know were babies and how they found their feet. Well, many adults find their feet when they're doing yoga. Like they might not have really explored their feet. Like happy baby pose. And so again, we always think about if the person's never done it before, then it's a really huge step in development. We want to mirror the child's actions. So again, using that example of the child starting to throw, I might just get like a laundry basket or something to make it a little bit more purposeful and allow me to join. Because again, we're always trying to shape whatever the child or youth is doing into a shared experience. I would narrate and validate. And that's like I would say, the throwing in game. This is fun, And I would wait because I don't want to just be doing all the playing. Like I would see if the child picks up the next handy object. Again, we're not throwing real glasses. Again, we're not throwing glasses that are going to break. But if they were throwing anything, I'd wait to see if they do the next turn, and then I would. But we're not necessarily doing my turn, your turn. It's more that spontaneous back and forth. So we talked a little bit about staying part of the toy. We didn't talk about playful obstruct. This is for a child who's already calm and regulated. Playful obstruction is when, say, if we were doing a puzzle, the child's having a great time. I might just like hold a piece in my hand, and then I would say, "Uh-oh," and then I might open it, my hand, and just adding another layer. But you don't do playful obstruction until the child's calm and regulated. You wouldn't add a hurdle to the play if the child's struggling with regulation. And we want to persist and try and keep the back and forth interactions going. So remember, in the developmental model, we use relationships to foster all aspects of development. And you want to just draw upon your own experiences. Think about when you had the strongest emotional connection with an adult. It could be your own parents, but it might have been your Girl Scout leader. It might have been your clergy person. And then think back, what were the just right ingredients for when you engaged and connected, either with your own child or when you were a child? Was it the time of day? Was the play part of predictable routines? Were you and your child well rested, hydrated, regulated, etc.? And just some other things to think about. Did you join your child's interest? Did you join what your child was doing? And this is a hard one. I've had many parents say this over the years. Like, Sue, if I have to do this same puzzle one more time, I'm going to scream. And and it is hard, and if one of my boys was completely into Legos, and Legos are fun, but wasn't necessarily my all day interest. But when I wanted to engage and connect, I would use his interests, and it's really not about our interest. So sometimes we have to just stay interested, regardless if we're not so interested. Because if you're getting that engagement, you're getting that back and forth circles of communication, you are making huge progress. So that's why it's so important. And some of the teens may be interested in subjects that are completely, I have no knowledge of. Because, and then I have to kind of go back and just learn a little bit of it. Same with movies and YouTube videos. I sometimes watch what they're, just go home and kind of get a little bit of working knowledge of what's interesting. And it's important to allow for repetition of the play, because children and adults, we all learn through repetition. And if there's motor planning challenges, children need more repetition to learn. Again, I'm not a speech language pathologist, but I'm just going to share some information about fostering language and communication in the developmental model. Before you can speak words, you have to share attention with another person. That's just basic. So even if you think of a young baby who's doing some, cooing, they're first sharing attention with you. So that would be the same with any person of any age. You need to have regulation and shared attention first. You want to have mutual gaze. And we want to count nonverbal communication as communication, because it is. So if a child's gesturing and saying, I want bubbles, by just coming up to me and maybe saying boom, boom for bubbles, I don't think I want to say, I don't necessarily want to say, I want bubbles, because then the child learns to say, I want bubbles. And that's not natural, the child's words and communication will follow. And of course we want children to be able to express their thoughts and ideas, by, words are certainly easier than sign language or AAC, but we want to be careful about just how much, if the child's already communicated, we can honor that, what they've already told us. And of course, we want the comprehension of language. It's just as important as the words. And we want to think about, is the child able to communicate their wants, needs, interests, and engage in self-advocacy? So many people say, well, my child is 10 now. Is the developmental model or DR Floortime model just, for younger children? And the answer is no, not at all. The developmental model can be used at any age, and it's also used, believe it or not, for adults at the end of their life, because it gives them a chance, an opportunity to maybe go back to a previous level of development. So it can be used for adults with dementia too. Not as common as children, but it can be. So the answer is, it's never too late. So I was thinking about some client scenarios that we could think and practice together. But when I was preparing these, I was thinking, I could be working with a 13-year-old who's really, because it's developmental model, the 13-year-old may have different, they may have different capacities. So say their functional emotional developmental capacities, they're really working on back and forth circles of communication. So again, that would be thinking about making sure they have shared attention and regulation, being able to engage and have those back and forth. So that 13-year-old in the developmental model, I would still be working on those earlier things. I would just be using their interest. So like a teen might be interested more in playing video games, or they may be more interested in watching YouTube videos. Again, these use of electronics is always harder to join than 3D objects. So we know it's harder, but you can do it. It could be, I'm really not. I have two boys that were very interested in video games, but I really was not so interested in myself. So I really, my husband connected more on that than me. But you can do it. And it might be the first step in doing that might be sharing space. So if you have a teen who's very self-absorbed and just wants to play video games locked in his or her own room, the first step to that process might be just sharing space and watching together, where you're the onlooker of what the young adult is doing. And then you might join a little bit by making, some comments like, wow, that's really cool. Again, and just like subtly becoming part of the play and then seeing where it goes. Now, if your teen walks out the room, you've pushed it a little too far. And again, it's always calibrating. How long were we able to stay connected? How long was the teen, letting me join a little bit in what he or she was doing? So if we started at 2 minutes, the next time I join, I'm going to see if I could at least do it for two minutes and then see if I could bump it up for another minute. And again, that's my data too. People think in a developmental model, it's not, it's more qualitative data. Not at all. It's quantitative data too, because, time can be measured. The amount of back and forth circles of communication can be measured. So it is, it can be very much data driven, but just in a more natural way. We're not going to use clickers. I'm going to be holding the pieces in my mind. Yeah. And again, I want to make sure you get a chance to get to the keynote, but you might say why? Well, the reason to the answer why is we want families to have a choice and children to have a choice, teens to have a choice in their care. And there are options in autism care. As Sherry was just saying, there's the behavioral approach and there's the developmental approach, which are both covered by New Jersey Family Care now, as well as some insurances. And what's interesting, we often think about the developmental model with the iceberg analogy. At the surface of the iceberg are what usually are behaviors, and that they tend to be addressed through a behavioral approach. But what's below the surface of the water are things, the underlying causes. And we're thinking about the individual differences, the profile of the child, where they're holding with their functional emotional development. So the developmental model treats things that are both invisible as well as visible, but focuses a lot of the underlying reasons. And Sherry definitely has more information on that. And then, in putting all the pieces together, families in New Jersey now have a choice in autism care. And there are many self-advocacy groups. So 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐼 is one of them, Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. They've really come out strongly about, services they have perhaps received as a younger child, but really have stressed the importance of not necessarily extinguishing behaviors per se, and the goal isn't to make them more normal, but just as we all do, we try and be our best selves. Our best self. Today might be different than my best self on a Monday, but it's always trying to be our best selves, so that I can be the best person each day. And I just included the references, and my email address is there as well. So I want to thank you. Yay.
Support public libraries. Like, share, and subscribe for more great videos.